up each other, lifting policies that boost our economy and our country, and holding the line on those that do things like pull healthcare from 20 million.
It's Thursday, May 4, 2017.
I think you'll see a market decline in solar installers, solar businesses, and people that are considering it.
Indiana governor signs bill to gut state's rooftop solar industry. Another coal mine tragedy, this time in Iran. Exxon ordered to pay $20 million for refinery pollution. Denmark moves to phase out renewable energy subsidies. Plus, Rhode Island town makes history as the first in the U.S. to be powered by offshore wind.
All of those history lessons and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
You can't deny global warming is happening and then say, but don't call us stupid. That's the little dilemma I'm in.
What a stupid dilemma. This is your Green News Report.
Don't call me stupid. Well, then don't be stupid.
I'm gonna soak up the sun.
Okay, Desi Doyen, speaking of stupid, we're keeping our eyes on the White House and their decision about whether or not they will become the shame of planet Earth by having the U.S. drop out of the landmark UN Paris Climate Agreement. Just incredible that they're even thinking about it, but they are, and we're keeping our eyes on that until that decision. What else do you have for us today, Desi Doyen?
Well, first, in Iran, another fossil fuel tragedy. At least 21 miners were killed and dozens more injured in a coal mine explosion in the northern Iranian province of Golestan on Wednesday. Rescue operations were suspended due to toxic gases that sent 25 responders to a hospital. Officials say as many as 40 coal miners may still be trapped in the mine. Here in the U.S., in Indiana Governor Eric Holcomb on Tuesday signed legislation to phase out payments to homeowners who sell clean electricity back to the grid.
Unbelievable.
Indiana's powerful electric utility industry aggressively lobbied the state legislature to pass the bill to end net metering on new rooftop solar installations. It's a tactic increasingly deployed in state legislatures by investor-owned utilities seeking to block competition from rooftop solar. In an interview with WRTV in Indianapolis, one resident said the law is already impacting potential buyers.
This is going to discourage people putting solar panels on their roofs, and because of the net metering aspects of it. I know a number of people right now who've put their orders for solar panels on hold.
And remember, these are the champions of the free market who are doing this, who are making it harder to buy clean solar, easier to burn dirty coal. Geniuses and hypocrites all.
In Texas, a federal judge has ordered oil giant ExxonMobil to pay $20 million for violating the Clean Air Act more than 16,000 times over a 5-year period.
Really?
At its Baytown, Texas refinery, located 25 miles east of Houston. Environment Texas, which brought the lawsuit over the pollution, described the fine as, quote, the largest penalty resulting from a citizen suit in U.S. history.
Well, they only violated it 16,000 times?
Yeah. In Alaska, good news for polar bears. The U.S. Supreme Court on Monday refused to hear a case on the federal government's decision to designate more than 187,000 square miles in Alaska as critical habitat for threatened polar bears. That means a decision by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to protect large swaths of Alaska's coast and waters will stand. Also in Alaska, the Natural Resources Defense Council filed suit in federal court on Wednesday to block President Trump's executive order to lift a ban on offshore drilling in parts of the Arctic and the Atlantic Oceans, areas that had been protected by President Obama last year. The suit alleges that lifting the ban violates federal law. NRDC and the law firm Earth Justice filed the complaint on behalf of a coalition of indigenous Alaskan tribes who will be most impacted by offshore drilling. Meanwhile, the nation of Denmark will soon phase out subsidies for wind energy because its industry no longer needs them. The nation is now on target to have all of its energy needs met by renewables by 2050. The Danish energy minister said it's a development he could not have imagined as recently as last year. The nation is now on target to have all of its energy needs met by renewables by 2050.
That's very good news. Wow, good story.
Here in the U.S., the City Council of Atlanta has unanimously recently approved a measure to source 100% of its electricity from renewable energy. It's the 27th city in the U.S. and the first in Georgia to make the commitment.
Also a good story.
Finally, just 10 months after starting construction, America's first ever offshore wind farm is now generating clean electricity off the coast of Rhode Island. On Monday, May 1st, Block Island, Rhode Island shut down its small diesel power plant forever. And after a moment of silence, switched on the new 5-turbine Block Island wind farm off the coast of Rhode Island, the first offshore wind farm in the U.S. In a statement, officials said, quote, "The silence was symbolic for saving nearly 1 million gallons of diesel fuel annually."
Too much good news. I don't know what I'm going to do. Thank you. For much more on all of these reports and the ones we couldn't get to, check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. From bradblog.com, I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Good day, sunshine. Good day, sunshine. Good day, sunshine. I need to laugh, and when the sun is out, I've got something I can.
Mary had a little man. The fault. We believe that all men are created equal.
To the magnificent mosaic that is America.
From radio beacon to radio beacon.
I have a dream today.
Change has come to America.
Believe it.
Knock, knock. Who's there?
It's a figment of your imagination.
Randi Rhodes Show. Turn up your mind.
As a former military officer, you simply cannot take money from Russia, Turkey, or anybody else. And it appears as if he did take that money. It was inappropriate. And there are repercussions for the violation of law. General Flynn had a duty and an obligation to seek and obtain permission to receive money from foreign governments prior to any engagement with them. It does not appear to us that that was ever sought, nor did he ever get that permission.
He's a jackass.
Is what the president said. The president said that Michael Flynn is a jackass, and he told the incoming Trump administration in that little get-together that they had on November 10th, 2 days after the election, the outgoing president, Obama, and the elect, the POTUS, Donald Trump, had a meeting. Remember that? Trump visited the White House, said he was so nice, loved Obama, really good guy. Unbelievable. Great. Welcoming, making the transition easy and fun, and all those really cool things. Yeah, and so in that meeting, we now know that President Obama outgoing told POTUS incoming that Michael Flynn was a very strange dude, that he had been fired as the director of national intelligence, that he was not a fan of General Flynn, which, shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody, that he didn't think that he would be suitable to become an advisor, the national security advisor to the POTUS, that he had very strange views and that he was acting in a strange way when it came to things like Russia attending meetings, Vlad's, and being photographed at the head table with the head douche of Russia, Putin. So anyway, now we know that. So today is a very big day. Right now, as I speak, the former acting attorney general, Sally Yates, is testifying that she gave, and I will catch you up, I will play you what you missed, and then we will go into it live so that you don't miss a thing. She is testifying that she gave very strong warnings, as did President Obama, to the incoming Trump administration regarding General Michael Flynn's contacts with Russia. She actually told the White House about this. She called them, said she could not speak to them on the phone about what she needed to speak to them about. She called the general counsel. She called White House counsel Don McGahn, who I remember talking to my beautiful friend John Dean, the hero of the Watergate garbage. And I said to him, how could McGahn be running a White House like this? And he said he had no idea how this could possibly be going on. And this was way back in the day, like a few months ago, right? Before all this. Anyway, she testifies that she called the White House and she said to Don McGahn, listen, something is going down and it's bad. Michael Flynn is lying. He's lying to the American people, according to all the public statements that your campaign is making, that the president is making, because at this time it was January 26th, and the president was not the POTUS, he was the president, Trump. And she said, he's lying. He's lying a lot. He's lying. And I have something I need to show you. I can't talk to you about this on the phone. May I come to the White House? And she brought a guy who was in charge of the counterintelligence investigation into these intercepted phone calls with Sergei Kislyak that incidentally records Michael Flynn talking about lifting sanctions on Russia. And she says, listen, you got problems. He is lying about these conversations that he had with the Russian ambassador, Sergei Kislyak. He was talking about easing sanctions. I see, Pence on the TV saying that that's not true. There's stuff here. Can I come over? He says, yeah, come over. All right. So it's the 27th of January. This is her first meeting. Now, I want you to know there is a timeline here. Sally Yates had 2 in-person meetings at the White House, and also a subsequent substantive phone call. Okay? So here is how the first meeting at the White House went.
Right. So I told them again that there were a number of press accounts of statements that had been made by the vice president and other high-ranking White House officials about General Flynn's conduct that we knew to be untrue. And we told them how we knew that how we had this information, how we had acquired it, and how we knew that it was untrue. And we walked the White House counsel, who also had an associate there with him, through General Flynn's underlying conduct, the contents of which I obviously cannot go through with you today because it's classified. But we took them through in a fair amount of detail of the underlying conduct, what General Flynn had done, and then we walked through the various press accounts and how it had been falsely reported. We also told the White House counsel that General Flynn had been interviewed by the FBI on February 24th. Mr. McGahn asked me how he did, and I declined to give him an answer to that. And we then walked through with Mr. McGahn essentially why we were telling them about this. And the first thing we did was to explain to Mr. McGahn that the underlying conduct that General Flynn had engaged in was problematic in and of itself. Secondly, we told him we felt like the vice president and others were entitled to know that the information that they were conveying to the American people wasn't true. And we wanted to make it really clear right out of the gate that we were not accusing Vice President Pence of knowingly providing false information to the American people. And in fact, Mr. McGahn responded back to me to let me know that anything that General Flynn would have said would have been anything that Vice President Pence would have said would have been based on what General Flynn had told him. We told him the third reason is because we were concerned that the American people had been misled about the underlying conduct and what General Flynn had done. And additionally, that we weren't the only ones that knew all of this, that the Russians also knew about what General Flynn had done, and the Russians also knew that General Flynn had misled the vice president and others. Because in the media accounts, it was clear from the vice president and others that they were repeating what General Flynn had told them. And that this was a problem because not only did we believe that the Russians knew this, but that they likely had proof of this information. And that created a compromise situation, a situation where the national security advisor essentially could be blackmailed by the Russians.
Oh, geez. Oh.
Finally, we told them that we were giving them all of this information so that they could take action, the action that they deemed appropriate. I remember that Mr. McGahn asked me whether or not General Flynn should be fired, and I told him that that really wasn't our call, that was up to them, but that we were giving them this information so that they could take action.
That's not good. Don't you want to know what the underlying conduct was? I want to know. What did he do? Are we talking, more pee parties? I don't know what we're talking about here. Apparently, there's some underlying conduct of General Flynn's that not only became known to the Department of Justice, but also was known to the Russians. And that is why Sally Yates was so adamant about contacting the White House and Don McGahn, the counsel at the White House to President Trump, to let him know it wasn't just us that knew about this underlying conduct of Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, but that the Russians knew about this conduct too, and that he was completely blackmailable. Also, he was lying. What is the underlying conduct? Whatever it was, the second meeting that they had at the White House, which was the 28th of January, the second meeting, I believe it was 28th or 29th, was to discuss what criminal statutes applied to this underlying conduct.
So did you take that summary with you? Do you have any document with you that described the FBI interview of General Flynn?
At the time that I was there, I had notes that described that interview, as well as the individual that was with me, the senior career official from the National Security Division, had been part of all of those discussions with the FBI.
Did you discuss criminal prosecution of Mr. Flynn, General Flynn?
My recollection is that did not really come up much in the first meeting. It did come up in the second meeting when Mr. McGahn called me back the next morning and asked the morning after, this is the morning of the 27th now, and asked me if I could come back to his office. And so I went back with the NSD official, and there were essentially 4 topics that he wanted to discuss there. And one of those topics was precisely that. He asked about the applicability of certain statutes, certain criminal statutes, and more specifically
this is
about...
a second meeting at the White House counsel's office. In his office again?
In his office again.
With the same 2 individuals?
Exactly.
On the following day?
Right.
And you went back pursuant to a phone call request, or was...
Yes, the morning of the 27th, after our meeting had occurred on the afternoon of the 26th, the morning of the 27th, Mr. McGahn called me and asked if I could come back to the White House to discuss this further. And we set up a time, and I went over there that afternoon, bringing again the same career official with me from the National Security Division who was overseeing this investigation. He had the same associate from the White House counsel's office, and we talked through 4 to 5 more issues.
You could perhaps have waited until you actually had seen the Agents 302 from the interview of General Flynn. Why go ahead of that? Why not wait?
Well, because this was a matter of some urgency.
Describe.
In making the determination about notification here, we had to balance a variety of interest. For the reasons that I just described a few minutes ago, we felt like it was critical that we get this information to the White House.
Oh, my God.
In part because the vice president was unknowingly making false statements to the public, and because we believed that General Flynn was compromised with respect to the Russians. We were balancing this, though, against the FBI's investigation, as you would always do, and take into account the investigating agency's desires and concerns about how a notification might impact that ongoing investigation. But once General Flynn was interviewed, there was no longer a concern about an impact on an investigation.
Do you know where that interview took place, or under what circumstances?
I believe it took place at the White House.
The Flynn interview?
Yes.
Okay. Do you know if Flynn was represented by counsel at the time?
I don't believe he was.
Okay. And the scenario that you were concerned about was that you were seeing all these statements coming from the White House that were inconsistent with what you knew. You presumed that the White House was being truthful, which meant that Flynn was misleading them,
right.
Which meant that he was vulnerable to manipulation by the Russians, who, knowing what had actually taken place, could call up the national security advisor to the president and say, you got to do this for us, or we're going to out you with all your folks and your career is done.
That's right, because one of the questions that Mr. McGahn asked me when I went back over the second day was essentially, why does it matter to DOJ if one White House official lies to another White House official?
That was his question.
And so we explained to him it was a whole lot more than that, and went back over the same concerns that we had raised with them the prior day, that the concern first about the underlying conduct itself, that he had lied to the vice president and others, the American public had been misled, and then importantly, that every time this lie was repeated, and the misrepresentations were getting more and more specific as they were coming out, every time that happened, it increased the compromise. And to state the obvious, you don't want your national security advisor compromised with the Russians.
Oh, God. Oh, God. All right, so So remember, November 10th, 2 days after the election, President Obama says to Donald Trump, I don't really think Flynn's your guy for national security advisor. The guy's an odd duck, okay? He's got really weird views about, Muslims. He's got real, interaction with Russians that he shouldn't have. He's not a trustworthy guy. His word is worth nothing. And we fired him. We fired him, and we fired him for a reason. He was our top intelligence officer he was the director of national intelligence. And to fire a guy like that, there really has to be a reason, and here's what it is. He's got access to all this intelligence, and he gives it to our adversaries. I really wouldn't go forward with his, appointment to national security advisor. Trump does it anyway. What does Obama know? He's not even American. He's a Muslim. Of course he hates Flynn. Flynn hates Muslims. Obama's a Muslim. So he hires him. Okay. They're inside the White House on the 20th of January. 6 days later, not even a week they're in the White House, Sally Yates calls up Don McGahn and goes, oh, Jesus, oh, God, we have become aware of some really disturbing conduct that Michael Flynn has been engaged in. Conduct that is compromising him, not just as our national security advisor, but the Russians know the same stuff we know, and this guy is blackmailable. I really need to come to the White House and show you what we have. She goes to the White House. She shows them what the notes are from the FBI's investigation. Now, that's Comey. Comey obviously had interviewed Flynn by this point. Flynn obviously lied to Comey, which in and of itself is a crime. You cannot lie to the FBI. We learned that from Hillary. Remember? We learned that from Hillary. From Hillary's, investigation into her emails. If she had lied to James Comey about anything to do with that server in the basement, she would be in jail, and Flynn would have gotten to lock her up. Instead, it looks like we're going to lock Flynn up because Flynn lied to the FBI. He did exactly what he was accusing Hillary of doing, lying to the FBI. So now his interview is concluded. And there's no reason not to tell the White House because it won't interfere with the investigation Comey's doing into Flynn. He's already got his testimony. So she goes over there before she even has the full report, the 302. She's got notes from the interview that Flynn gave Comey. Now she's ready to go. She goes to the White House 6 days into the Trump administration and says, listen, I have to tell you that there is conduct that the Russians know and the Russians either have seen or heard about Michael Flynn. He's lying to Mike Pence and he's lying to the American people and causing you to lie to the American people. You got a problem on your hand. Okay, go home. She goes home the next day in the morning. Don McGahn, the counsel at the White House, calls her up and says, can you come back here? Can you come back? She says, yes, I can come back. She goes back to the White House. Do you know what, after all this, what was the lawyer's question to Sally Yates, the acting Attorney General of the United States? His question is, why do you care if one person in the White House is lying to another person in the White House? What is it your business? Why do you care? That's his question. She says, I care because there are criminal statutes here that have been violated. Oh, there are? Well, let's go over those. She goes over the criminal statutes that now apply to Michael Flynn's case, things he could be prosecuted for. And it sounds like statutes, plural, more than one, which means more than just lying to the FBI. And then they send her home. Then there's another phone call. What do they want? Can we see the evidence that you have? She says, let me get back to you on that. We'll play that on the other side of the break. And then she says, yeah, sure. Come on over. Take a gander. She does all the logistics, sets up the meeting, and guess what happens? She's fired. Oh, wow, man. It's good.
Clear for takeoff. Randi Rhodes Air Force. Air Force. RandiRhodes.com. For a commercial-free, on-demand, whenever, wherever listening experience, visit RandiRhodes.com for your personal premium podcast today.
Well, it's clear that something's very, very wrong with the nation's economy. It's experiencing anemic growth. Our middle class is shrinking. Retirees are facing nationwide pension crises, with many pensions being underfunded and headed toward insolvency. The stock market's super volatile, and many experts say it's way overpriced. The Trump administration is MIA with their amazing economic plan for America. So how are you feeling about your economic security? Call my friends at ITM Trading. Just speak with one of their precious metals experts about gold and find out why now is the perfect time for gold. Learn why gold survives every government, every currency, every economic crisis. Call ITM Trading today at 1-888-OWN-GOLD and they'll send you a free gold buyer's guide. They've helped tens of thousands of people acquire physical gold and silver, and they can help you too. Call 1-888-OWN-GOLD, 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 1-888-OWN-GOLD.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1877. That was the day American socialist Mary Marcy was born. Raised in Belleville, Illinois, Mary moved to Kansas City and joined the Socialist Party. She found work as a secretary to meatpacking executives at Swift and then Armour. Her 1904 investigative series, Letters of a Pork-Packing Stenographer, published in the International Socialist Review, revealed the inner workings of the Big Five Trust. Marcy described how the packing house bosses manipulated markets, set rates and prices, and created an industrial monopoly. She also exposed low wages and dangerous working conditions in the industry. Months later, she provided testimony and secret correspondence of executives to a grand jury investigation. The case made a big splash in the press, though packers would win immunity from prosecution a year later. Mary lost her job and hired on with the Associated Charities of Kansas City. There she became critical of philanthropic forces that lectured the poor on morals rather than providing concrete aid. She serialized her experiences in the fictional account Out of the Dump. Returning to Chicago, Mary worked as an assistant editor to the International Socialist Review. Her wildly popular book, Shop Talks on Economics, served as a primer on socialism. She continued to agitate against World War I, publishing articles like You Have No Country. Mary threw her lot in with the IWW in 1918, though the split of the socialist movement soon after affected her deeply. She and her husband lost their home after mortgaging it to provide bail for numerous wobblies, including Big Bill Haywood, then swept up in Red Scare conspiracy trials. The period proved too much for Mary, and in 1922, she took her own life. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
All things Randy at randyrhodes.com.
Go for launch.
Speaking truth to power, The Randi Rhodes Show.
One of the issues that Mr. McGahn raised with me in this second meeting, that again was on the 27th, the day after the first meeting, was his concern, because we had told him before that we were giving him this information so that they could take action. And he said that they were concerned that taking action might interfere with the FBI investigation. And we told him, both the senior career official and I, that he should not be concerned with it, that General Flynn had been interviewed, that their action would not interfere with any investigation. And in fact, I remember specifically saying, it wouldn't really be fair of us to tell you this and then expect you to sit on your hands.
Was the interview of General Flynn accelerated once you became aware of this information and felt you needed to get his statement quickly?
Well, we had wanted to tell the White House as quickly as possible, and we're working with the FBI in the course of the investigation, but certainly we did as the misrepresentations.
The first thing you know is that you have information that one thing was said and the White House is saying something different. Mm-hmm. And you know that information, irrespective of who is involved, needs to get up to the White House quickly. And so at that point, the decision was made to do the interview so that was locked down before you went up to White House counsel?
Right, so that would not have a negative impact on the FBI investigation at that point. And there was a request made by Mr. McGahn in this second meeting as to whether or not they would be able to look at the underlying evidence that we had described for him of General Flynn's conduct. And we told him that we were inclined to allow them to look at that underlying evidence, that we wanted to go back to DOJ and be able to make the logistical arrangements for that. This second meeting on the 27th occurred late in the afternoon. This is Friday, the 27th. So we told him that we would work with the FBI over the weekend on this issue and get back with him on Monday morning. And I called him first thing Monday morning to let him know that we would allow them to come over and to review the underlying evidence.
And was that the phone call, or is there a separate phone call?
There was the phone call initially to let him know I needed to come see him.
Yep.
2 meetings, and then a phone call at the end to let him know
that the material
was available.
To see it.
He had to call me back. He was not available then, and I did not hear back from him until that afternoon of Monday the 30th.
And that was the end of this episode. Nobody came over to look at the material.
I don't know what happened after that because that was my last day with DOJ.
Got it.
So just so you can follow this, okay, it starts on November 10th. Obama warns him about Flynn. They don't give a rat's ass. They take over the White House on the 20th. 6 days later, Sally Yates calls Don McGahn, the counsel at the White House, to inform him that your national security advisor has taken part in some conduct that is blackmailable by the Russians. And it's not a good idea to have him as your national security advisor. I need to come over and show you something. May I come to the White House? Sure, come on over. She goes over to the White House. She shows them evidence of some underlying conduct that would make him blackmailable. She tells them that he's lying to the American people. He's lying, obviously, to Mike Pence, who is out on the TV saying that Mike Flynn has never discussed sanctions with the Russians or any such thing. The next morning, he calls her back and he says, can you come back to the White House? I have some more questions for you. She says, sure. She goes back to the White House. And what is their question? Their question is, why do you care if one person in the White House is lying to another person in the White House? What do you care if Michael Flynn is lying to Mike Pence? That is unbelievable. She says, well, I care because there are criminal statutes involved here, plural. And I need to go over them with you so that you're very clear who your national security advisor is and what he is facing with regard to an FBI investigation. Then she shows him, they go over all the criminal statutes. Then the next day he calls her up and says, I want to see your evidence. She says, okay, let me arrange it. Let me get, all the logistics in order. And you can come up here. We need to discuss this in a secure location. So there's some logistics involved because this is classified information. And I will arrange it. And then he calls Monday morning and she says, yes, we can do that. Why don't you call me back in the afternoon and we'll fix up, we'll get your schedule and we'll get you over here. And then that afternoon, she's fired. Of course, the Republicans in this hearing today are only interested in who leaked the information. How did it end up in the Washington Post? And, James Clapper is there, the former, head of the CIA, and Sally Yates is there, the former acting Attorney General of the United States. And they don't know how it ended up in the Washington Post. But that's all the Republicans are interested in. They're not interested in his behavior. They don't have any questions about what is his underlying conduct. Was it something of a physical nature? Did it have to do with remuneration? All I can tell you is that while all this is going on January 29th, while all this is being planned so she could show the evidence to Don McGahn at the White House, Trump signs an executive order elevating Steve Bannon to the National Security Council, putting him in the same room with Michael Flynn. He adds him, and he downgrades the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the director of national intelligence that nobody could understand. Like, why was he doing this? Obviously, he was closing the circle. He didn't want people that would say anything to him about Flynn's Flynn's provable compromised position that the Russians knew about. I'll also tell you, on the 28th, the same day she's trying to arrange for Don McGahn to come to a SCIF at the Department of Justice, a secure location at the Department of Justice, to look at all the evidence against Flynn. Flynn takes part in a phone call where Trump is on the phone and Vladimir Putin, the counterpart to Trump, is on the phone. The counterpart to Flynn is on the phone, and Trump and Flynn were sitting in the Oval Office and joined by Vice President Pence, Reince Priebus, the press secretary, Sean Spicer, and Steve Bannon. So she's arranging to show the White House counsel all this evidence, and they're still on the phone talking to Russia. Knowing there's a live issue with this guy, Flynn, they still include him in the meeting with Pence, with Bannon, with Flynn, and Donald Trump. They're all on the phone talking to somebody in Russia. And then the next day, Trump changes who's in the National Security Advisor, who's going to be on the National Security Council, and he puts Steve Bannon in there. And then on the 30th, she's fired as acting attorney general in a very strongly worded White House statement that she had betrayed the administration because she refused to defend what she believed to be an unconstitutional Muslim ban. Now, I'll tell you, John Cornyn tried to nail her. There's something wrong with you. How could you overrule the Office of Legal Counsel in the White House? The Office of Legal Counsel in the White House, which is the president's counsel, again, it's dumb again, says that there's nothing wrong with this Muslim ban. It's perfectly legal, and there's no reason why the Department of Justice shouldn't go into the court and defend it. She says, I'm sorry, I have to note, she said to Cornyn, I have to tell the Office of Legal Counsel that they were wrong. And he said, how dare you tell the White House counsel he's wrong? I know you're a 27-year Department of Justice veteran, but what could you possibly know?
The Office of Legal Counsel has a narrow function, and that is to look at the face of an executive order and to determine purely on its face whether there is some set of circumstances under which at least some part of the executive order may be lawful. And importantly, they do not look beyond the face of the executive order. For example, it's statements that are made contemporaneously or prior to the execution of the EO that may bear on its intent and purpose.
Ban on all Muslims.
That office does not look at those factors. And in determining the constitutionality of this executive order, that was an important analysis to engage in, and one that I did.
Well, Ms. Yates, I thought the Department of Justice had a long-standing tradition of defending a presidential action in court if there are reasonable arguments in its favor, regardless of whether those arguments might prove to be ultimately persuasive, which, of course, is up to the courts to decide and not you, correct?
It is correct that oftentimes, but not always, the civil division of the Department of Justice will defend an action of the president or an action of Congress if there is a reasonable argument to be made. But in this instance, all arguments have to be based on truth, because we're the Department of Justice. We're not just a law firm, we're the Department of Justice. And
Can
in
you
this
distinguish
instance,
the truth from lawful?
Yes, because in this instance, in looking at what the intent was of the executive order, which was derived in part from an analysis of facts outside the face of the order, that is part of what led to our conclusion that it was not lawful, yes.
Well, Ms. Yates, you had a distinguished career for 27 years with the Department of Justice, and I voted for your confirmation because I believe that you had a distinguished career. But I have to tell you that I find it enormously disappointing that you somehow vetoed the decision of the Office of Legal Counsel with regard to the lawfulness of the president's order and decided instead that you would countermand the executive order of the President of the United States because you happen to disagree with it as a policy matter.
Well, it wasn't.
I just have to say that.
I appreciate that, Senator. And let me make one thing clear. It was not purely as a policy matter. And in fact, I remember my confirmation hearing in an exchange that I had with you and others of your colleagues where you specifically asked me in that hearing that if the president asked me to do something that was unlawful or unconstitutional, and one of your colleagues said, or even just that would reflect poorly on the Department of Justice, would I say no? And I looked at this, I made a determination that I believed that it was unlawful. I also thought that it was inconsistent with the principles of the Department of Justice, and I said no, and that's what I promised you I would do, and that's what I did.
So, obviously, everybody in this audience knows that when it comes to applying law and statute to crimes or to constitutionality or unlawfulness, intent matters. And because Donald J. Trump was calling for a ban on all Muslims coming into the United States, the intent was known to every American man, woman, and child who had ever paid the least bit of attention to Donald J. Trump's campaign. And so she said, no, I will not defend this because the intent was a ban on all Muslims. And while the Office of Legal Counsel had a limited legal obligation to look at the face of the executive order to see if there was anything unconstitutional in the presentation of it or on the face of it, the answer clearly was no. What was also just as obvious was the plain meaning, Gorsuch, of the Muslim ban that he had called for, that Rudy Giuliani was on the TV saying, that Donald Trump asked for, that Rudy Giuliani said he would come up with a way to make it look legal. And that is what that Muslim ban was, and she refused to defend it. This is why they say at the White House they fired her. But now we know the real reason. She had a great deal of evidence against Michael Flynn. She had recordings of Michael Flynn. She had intercepted some sort of inappropriate or illegal, actually is the right word, behavior, some conduct he engaged in that we still don't know. I have a feeling it was he took money from the Russians in exchange, a quid pro quo, for taking sanctions off the United States, and was caught on the phone either thanking them for their payment and assuring them that he would act on their behalf going forward as the national security advisor, or something really close to that effect. So much so that she had to go and tell the White House criminal statutes had been violated. But don't worry about the FBI investigation because Michael Flynn's already talked to James Comey, and that interview did not go well. But it's done, and he lied, and don't worry, that investigation will not be jeopardized by anything that you do, but you do need to fire him because he is compromised and blackmailable. And that is what was in the newspaper. That is what the Washington Post had in the newspaper. And of course, we don't know how it got there, but that is all the Republicans care about. That's all they care about. Now, if somebody gets caught as being the leaker inside the Department of Justice or inside the National Security Agency or inside the CIA or inside the FBI, that person is in deep, deep trouble. It is a felony. They will be in trouble. But the Washington Post has no burden to not print the information, even if it's classified. No burden whatsoever. Comey testified to that last week. They asked him, do we start prosecuting journalists now? And he said, no, we never do. We don't do it. It's not their burden to not print. Although he did say they usually call and they almost always ask, if we print this, will we be jeopardizing any active investigation? Will we be jeopardizing any American lives? Will we be jeopardizing any active American operation? And if the answer is no, the newspapers, the real journalists, go ahead and print it. But almost always they ask before they release this information to the public, and the answer was no. And now you know why. Because Flynn had already testified, and nobody thought that anything that was going to be printed would interfere with this investigation. So whoever the leaker is, yes, they're in trouble. But the reporter is not. The newspaper is not. But this is why Donald Trump wants to do something about the libel laws. He hates a freaking free press. He is a constitutional mess. We inherited a constitutional mess. What a mess. He's a mess. And that's why this morning he was crazy tweeting and misspelling counsel.
Call in, connect. To speak to Randy, call 561-270-3844. 561-270-3844.
Buy a stinking podcast. I love Herky Jerky because it's big protein, big flavor, big packs, and teeny tiny carbs. And that's why jerky is my favorite snack, but you cannot get the best stuff at the gas station. You have to order it online from herkyjerky.com, the best purveyors of jerky I have ever found. Herky Jerky is the official snack of the Randi Rhodes Air Force, and it comes in elk and buffalo, beef and bacon. Oh yes, bacon, hot, mild, 14 other incredible flavors. And for the month of May, $6 off any order of $60 or more. Just use promo code SPRING. Free shipping as always when you order 2 packs or more. Try the venison, the beef, the buffalo, the bacon, the elk. Try the sticks, try the slabs. Beef, elk, venison, bacon sticks, the most amazing thing you have ever had. The sticks have the right bite to them. The flavor is amazing, delicious, and fresh every time. And $6 off your order of 60 or more. Visit herkyjerky.com right now. herkyjerky.com.
Here's a sample of what you'll hear on the Leslie Marshall Show weekdays, 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern on the Progressive Voices Network. One of the things that Republicans hated about the Affordable Care Act is that people had a mandate to have insurance. So when you take away that mandate, that says that a lot of the young, healthier segment of those roles can leave. And then if they do and choose anyone not to have insurance, they go to the emergency room, especially when more people are becoming seniors. And as we age, we get sick. Then you have emergency rooms overburdened with so many patients and not enough medical teams to take care of those patients. If somebody doesn't have insurance, they're not being checked at the doctor's office. They're going to get help at the ER when it reaches critical mass. And by the way, folks, that's exactly the reason originally we needed reform in the first place. So what this bill will do, if it becomes law, is send us right back to where we were. Overburdened ERs, forcing more hospitals to close because they can't cover the costs. And that's just with removing the mandate. Well, then the insurance companies are going to have to increase the rates. I mean, they're losing people. Hello. To offset that, right? What are they going to have to do? So Republicans can help corporations, these poor insurance companies where these presidents are making 7 figures and have a golden parachute even if they fail. They say, you know what? You can take the people with pre-existing conditions off, and then you can offer the healthy people a lower premium or maybe a lower deductible. And some of you go, yeah, but what happens to those people with pre-existing conditions? Oh, don't worry about it. They say we're going to have a risk pool. $8 billion is not going to fund over 20 million people with a pre-existing condition. It does nothing to cover the future. So what that does by having a risk pool, it basically says, look, we have money so you can buy insurance. What it doesn't tell you is the insurance companies can raise your rate so high that it doesn't matter how much money's in that risk pool, and you're not going to be able to afford the insurance. So quite frankly, I'm not trying to scare you, but if you have a pre-existing condition, you have every right to be scared. And it's the people out there with the pre-existing conditions, even more so, who need to be the most vocal now and through that midterm election. Because this is not political for you, it's personal. If you have a pre-existing condition, with Obamacare, insurance companies could not refuse you insurance and could not charge you more. If you have AIDS, an insurance company with this new plan can say, I'm going to deny you coverage. And the insurance company with this new plan also could say, well, I won't deny you coverage, or you can stay with me, but I'm going to increase your premiums by 137%. And nothing stops them from doing that. That is frightening. That's un-American. It's inhumane. Those are not family values. That is not being pro-life. Hear the whole story on the Leslie Marshall Show, Monday to Friday, 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, 3 to 4 p.m. Pacific on the Progressive Voices Network.
The Randi Rhodes Show is brought to you by our partners at ITM Trading. Call them at 1-888-OWN-GOLD and ask for a free gold kit. 1-888-OWN-GOLD.
For a commercial-free, on-demand, whenever, wherever listening experience, visit randyrhodes.com for your personal premium podcast today.
All right, Senator Patrick Leahy is questioning Sally Yates right now, and I think you're all caught up on what the order of events was and the timeline with regard to Sally Yates. The 27th, she calls the White House counsel. She tells the White House counsel there is some conduct that General Flynn has engaged in that has made him blackmailable by the Russians. Not only do we have it, but they have it too. I would suggest that you remove him as well. She doesn't even go that far. She said, I'm telling you this so you can decide whether or not to remove him as the national security advisor to this young presidency. He calls her back and he says, why do you care? He says, come back to the White House. Why do you care? Why do you care if one person lies to another? What do you care if Michael Flynn's lying to Mike Pence? What? That was his reaction to all this. She said, well, let me go over the criminal statutes that are in play right now with regard to General Michael Flynn. And he says, well, what do we do? Because, if you're telling me there's an FBI investigation, I don't want to disturb it. She goes, oh, don't worry about it. You're not going to disturb the FBI investigation because he's already told Comey what he's told Comey. And quite frankly, it didn't go very well. He sort of kind of lied. And that's illegal, too. And then she has the actual 302 report on this at the second meeting, which shows what Flynn told Comey. And she said, this is not good. Plus, there's the underlying conduct. Just letting you know. Calls her back and says, I want to see your evidence. She says, sure. Yeah, sure. Come on up. And as soon as he is told yes, he can go to the Department of Justice and look at the evidence that they have against General Michael Flynn. She's fired. Michael Flynn isn't fired. Michael Flynn, this is all, January. Michael Flynn isn't fired till February 13th. February 13th. Okay, so let's listen in for a little bit and see what goes on, okay?
Yes, it could be. You could rationalize that helps the Russians by obfuscating
Russians. They're everywhere.
Who is actually responsible.
Thank you. Thank you very much, General. Thank you, Ms. Yates. It's good to have you both
I
here.
believe Al Franken is next.
Senator Franken.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank both you and the ranking member for this hearing and these hearings, and I want to thank General Clapper and
okay, and thank the Academy and
Attorney General Yates,
your manager, and Franny, my beautiful wife,
appearing today.
4,000 years.
We have the intelligence communities have concluded, all 17 of them, that Russia interfered with this election, and we all know how that's right.
Senator, as I pointed out in my statement, Senator Franken, there were only 3 agencies that directly involved in this assessment, plus my office.
But all 17 signed on to that.
Well, we didn't go through that process. This was a special situation because of the time limits and what I knew to be who could really contribute to this and the sensitivity of the information. We decided it was a conscious judgment to restrict it to those 3. I'm not aware of anyone who dissented or disagreed when it came out.
Okay, and I think anyone who's looked at even the unclassified report is pretty convinced that this is what happened. And one of the questions is, why did they favor Donald Trump? There are a number of contacts and communications between Trump campaign officials and associates and members of the Trump administration, Jeff Sessions, as Senator Leahy mentioned, Carter Page, a former campaign advisor, Paul Manafort, who was a former campaign manager and chief strategist, Rex Tillerson, Secretary of State, got a friend of Russia award, Roger Stone, and of course Jared Kushner, White House senior advisor, son-in-law, and Michael Flynn. That's a lot.
7.
In my mind. Now, going to Flynn, he appeared during the campaign on Russia Today. Russia Today is the propaganda arm, one of the propaganda arm of. And now, you, General, since you've retired, have you appeared on Russia Today?
Not wittingly, no.
No. Okay. And General Flynn received $37,000 for sitting next to Putin at the 10th anniversary of Russia Today. It seems all this seemed very odd to me and raised a lot of questions. I was struck that Mr. McGahn did not ask you in the second meeting why DOJ, General Yates, would have concerns that the National Security Advisor had lied to the Vice President. In the first meeting, did you mention that he might be compromised?
Certainly, we went through all of our concerns in the first meeting. And it was in the second meeting that he just raised the question of essentially, why is this an issue for the Department of Justice if one White House official lies to another?
It is amazing.
Okay.
That's the question.
I don't understand why he didn't understand that.
I'm not sure I can help you with that, Senator.
It is bizarre.
General Flynn, after that, for 18 days, stayed there and was in one classified thing after another.
Yeah.
There are policies to deal with who gets clearance, security clearance, and not. Executive Order 12968 outlines the rules for security clearances. And it says that when there is a credible allegation that raises concern about someone's fitness to access classified information, that person's clearance should be suspended pending investigation. Is that right? The executive order also states that clearance holders must always demonstrate, quote, trustworthiness, honesty, reliability, discretion, and sound judgment, as well as freedom from allegiances and potential for coercion. Is that right? And yet, the White House counsel did not understand why the Department of Justice was concerned?
Well, to be fair to Mr. McGahn, I think the issue that he raised, he wasn't clear on was why we cared that Michael Flynn had lied to the Vice President and others. Why that was a matter essentially
I think that's clear.
Within DOJ jurisdiction.
I think it's so clear.
Yeah.
I can't. And the President had told, President Obama had told the incoming President-elect that 2 days after the election, don't hire this guy.
Really?
I don't know anything about that.
Well, that's what we've heard. And we have McGahn doesn't understand what's wrong with this. And then we have Spicer, the press secretary, saying the president was told about this. The president was told about this in late January, according to the press secretary. So now he's got a guy who has been, the former president said, don't hire this guy.
Right.
He's clearly compromised. He's lied to the vice president, and he keeps him on. And he lets him be in all these classified phone calls. He lets him talk with Putin. President of the United States and the National Security Advisor sit in the Oval Office and discuss this with Putin.
And Bannon.
Is it possible that the reason that he didn't fire him then was that, well, if I fire him for talking to the Russians about sanctions, and if I fire, what about all the other people on my team who coordinated? I mean, isn't it possible that the reason, because you ask yourself, why wouldn't you fire a guy who did this?
You're fired.
And all I can think of is that he would say, well,
everyone else did it.
We've got all these other people in the administration who've had contacts. We have all these other people in the administration who coordinated, who were talking. Maybe that. I'm just trying to we're trying to put a puzzle together here, everybody. And maybe, just maybe, He didn't get rid of a guy who lied to the vice president, who got paid by the Russians, who went on Russia Today, because there are other people in his administration who met secretly with the Russians and didn't reveal it till later, until they were caught. That may be why it took him 18 days until it came public to get rid of Mike Flynn, who was a danger to this republic. Care to comment?
No.
I don't think I'm going to touch that, Senator. Thank you.
Senator Blumenthal.
I didn't think that was it. Yeah. All right. That's Al Franken. Imagine working with him every single day. And it being in the break room, trying to get back on the air in time for the live show. Talking to him in the kitchen. And the question was, how was your weekend? You know.
The Randi Rhodes Show is live on RandiRhodes.com and the free Progressive Voices app for Android and iOS. Visit the App Store or ProgressiveVoices.com now.
Buy a stinking podcast.
You're listening to WIN, Workers Independent News, a diversified media enterprises production.
For WIN, I'm Joanne Powers. The nation's largest nurses union has condemned the passage of the American Health Care Act by House Republicans as cruel and unusual punishment for millions of Americans. Following the vote, National Nurses United issued a statement saying the bill to overturn the Affordable Care Act, popularly known as Obamacare, would deprive tens of millions of Americans of their health care coverage and threaten millions more with bankruptcy. NNU spokesperson Charles Idelson.
Well, I would call it a train wreck, except a train wreck is more humane than the monstrosity that got passed by the fanatics in the House. One thing that gets understated in the coverage is that it was essentially a cover for a massive hundreds of billions of dollar giveaway to the wealthiest people in the United States. Anywhere from $600 to $800 billion in tax cuts jammed into that bill, something like 80% of which go to the top 1% in this country. They decide to pass a tax cut and cover it by passing this incredibly punitive law that will, at a minimum, take away existing health coverage for up to 24 million people and also impose extremely punitive increases in out-of-pocket cost for people with pre-existing conditions. It's really a disgrace and out of touch with the entire rest of the world.
The union's many criticisms of the AHCA include the right of insurance companies to deny coverage to people with pre-existing conditions and the recreation of high-risk pools for these patients. Robert Craig of Citizen Action of Wisconsin says his own state's history with high-risk pools is representative of those across the nation.
It was very expensive. Quite frankly, it was underfunded. Minnesota and Wisconsin had larger pools, and they were still entirely inadequate. So it's a way of saying that people have somewhere to go, but premiums would be, according to most experts, $10,000 a year on average for high-risk pools, even if they did fund them at a much higher level than they actually put in the bill. High-risk pools across the country had waiting lists, lifetime limits on coverage.
Labor unions in Brazil have promised that the general strike that mobilized 35 million workers and paralyzed much of the country at the end of April was just the beginning of their fight against anti-worker reforms promoted by the government of wildly unpopular President Michel Temer. The unions are planning actions this week in all 27 of Brazil's states and will march on the nation's capital next week to put pressure on politicians. The proposed austerity measures include weakening labor protections, raising the retirement age, and a 20-year freeze on public spending.
Brought to you by the IBEW, 725,000 men and women powering the way for an American comeback. Information on how to become an International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers Power Professional is online at ibew.org.
Brought to you by UnionJobs.com, posting jobs for unions, socially allied, and community organizations since 1997.
You've been listening to WIN, Workers Independent News. For more information, visit laborradio.org.
Try and get up every morning, day after day, and work for a living. Let's see him try that. Then we'll see who's the real tough guy. The working man is the tough guy.
With me, Joe Wilson, a wealth management advisor
with a big money management house.
Mo money, yo money, Joe money.
We're happy to get the kind of money that jingles, but we'd rather get the kind that folds.
Not your grandpa's financial show.
What's going on, my money mavens and moolah misfits? It's me, your money guy, Joe Wilson of the Joe Knows Money Show, reporting live on Progressive Voices Network, delivering you 4 minutes of money news you can use. Trending this week in money news, according to Forbes, the average vacation expense per person in the United States is $1,145. That leads me to my next topic, 3 unique ways to offset your travel costs. Tip number 1. Use a service like Airbnb. Airbnb is an online marketplace that connects people looking to rent their homes with people who are looking for a place to stay. So if you rent out your home for the same amount of days that you are away on vacation, the money that you earn can be used to offset the cost of your vacation lodging. Also, you may find that you can save additional money by using the service yourself to rent a home instead of a hotel room. Tip number 2, use a service like Turo. Turo is a nationwide car rental marketplace. Most people's cars sit idle while they're on vacation. So why not make some money by renting out your car while you're away? What you earn from renting out your own car can be put towards your own vacation car rental. Tip number 3, use a service like Rodi. Rodi is an on-the-way delivery network app that matches people with packages to send with drivers already heading in that direction. For example, if you are driving across the country and have extra space in your vehicle, you can make money by taking an item from point A to point B. Now it's time for Joe's Money Trap of the Day. Although a timeshare often serves as a money-saving investment for frequent travelers, they may prove costly if you don't know how to detect a scam. Approximately 8 million Americans own timeshares, making the thriving industry ripe for con artists. Companies lure potential customers with free stays at a timeshare in exchange for the clients agreeing to simply sit through a timeshare presentation. But problems may arise once you agree to buy the property. Timeshare scams range from hidden booking and maintenance fees to more extreme cases such as companies suddenly going out of business once they secure your hefty deposit, leaving you without a timeshare. Visit the Better Business Bureau website, bbb.org, check for complaints registered against the timeshare company before attending any presentation. Cancel your meeting if the company has grievances filed against it. Here is Joe's money grab of the day. Get free flights with frequent flyer miles. The easiest and fastest way to get frequent flyer miles is to sign up for credit cards with big bonuses. Some credit cards will give you 100,000 points to sign up and complete a certain amount of spending. You can turn those 100,000 points into cheap travel. Some of these bonuses are enough for a family to go to Hawaii or fly first class to Europe and Asia. You don't have to get 50 cards to get enough miles for a vacation. 1 or 2 are all that you need to get started. Many cards come with an annual fee, so be sure to cancel the card before you get charged. And now it's time for Joe's money quote of the day. A penny saved is a penny earned. That is a quote by Benjamin Franklin. You are listening to the Joe Knows Money Show on Progressive Voices Network. Follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/Joe Knows Money to hear this and other money news you can use segments.
Mary had a little lamb. The fault. We believe that all men are created equal.
To the magnificent mosaic that is America.
From radio beacon to radio beacon.
I have a dream today.
Change has come to America.
Believe it. Knock, knock. Who's there?
It's a figment of your imagination.
Randi Rhodes Show. Turn up your mind.
Okay, so I think the best thing that we can do is to bring you the hearing live and just make sure that you're caught up on the storyline so far. And of course, it's a very simple one. On November 10th, 2 days after the election, President Obama had Donald Trump to the White House, as we all saw and knew. And Donald Trump was effusive in his praise for President Obama and his hospitality and his wisdom and his talk and his helpfulness on the transition. And one of the things that also occurred on that day was that President Obama warned President-elect Trump that hiring Michael Flynn as national security advisor would be a big mistake, huge, enormous, gigantic, just big, and not to do it, that he had fired him as the director of national intelligence, and that there was a reason for it, and that he was not trustworthy, that he wasn't of sound mind, that he had really disgusting views when it came to America versus, our adversaries. He kind of was siding with our adversaries' positions regarding things like NATO and invasions of their neighbors, and also that he had a really sick view of Muslims, and he was no fan, and he would rethink that particular appointment. But of course, it was up to Trump. Trump brings him into the White House, makes him National Security Advisor. He does. Lieutenant General Michael Locker Up Flynn. Okay. So now the White House comes in January 20th. The transition takes place. 6 days later, Sally Yates, the acting Attorney General of the United States of America, calls up the White House counsel, Don McGahn, and says, I really need to talk to you about Lieutenant General Michael Flynn. I can't talk to you on the phone. This is really serious stuff. Can I come to the White House? He says, okay, come on over. She goes over to the White House, lays out the notes from his FBI meeting with James Comey, or at least one of James Comey's deputies, and says, listen, the FBI interviewed Michael Flynn. They suspected that he had been compromised by the Russians. He had had constant contact with Russians. He had gone to Moscow, and, the interest of the FBI was piqued by certain events, and so they did call him in, and he came to the FBI without counsel, by the way, and he agreed to be interviewed. So when he sat down for this interview, turns out he lied, or it appears that he lied. She brings all the notes from the interview, not the actual 302 report of the interview, but the notes from the interview. And she also brings a national security deputy with her, and Don McGahn brings one of his deputies. So there's 4 people in this meeting. And she said, and there's also some underlying conduct, and we don't know what that is to this minute. Don't know what the underlying conduct is. But he says, okay, thanks a lot, and then lets her go. The next day, Don McGahn, the White House counsel, calls her up, and his only question to her is, why do you care if one member of the White House lies to another member of the White House? What is it your business? This was his question. She says, okay, I need to come back because I have to talk to you about something else. She goes back to the White House and she lays out for him all the criminal statutes under which Michael Flynn might be prosecuted. So there are various crimes here. He's like, oh, criminal statutes. Okay, so there's a crime. Oh, now I get it. Now I understand. Okay, go home. She leaves. He calls her the next morning and he says, can I see your evidence? She says, yeah, of course you can. Come on over. Come to the Department of Justice. I'll arrange for a secure room to talk in because this is all classified, and you can see our evidence. That day, she's fired. We were told she was fired for failure to defend the Muslim ban, which she also agrees to this minute was unconstitutional, and having now the benefit of many, many courts weighing in and saying, his intent was to do a Muslim ban, and that would be a religious ban, and America doesn't do that by virtue of its Constitution. So she stands by that. Anyway, the second she said, yeah, you can come and see our evidence, that's when she gets fired. Okay. So now Sidney Blumenthal is questioning her. And I believe his questions have to do with the lying to the FBI.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to thank
the Academy and my
Senator
wife.
Graham and Senator Whitehouse for conducting
my kids.
This hearing in a very bipartisan way and for prioritizing.
And my agent.
This issue, which is such gravity to our democracy. I want to thank each of you, not only for your long and distinguished service, but also for the conscience and conviction that you have brought to your jobs. Whether we agree or disagree with you, I hope that there are young prosecutors around the country and young members of our Intelligence Committee who will watch this hearing and say, that's the kind of professional I want to be, not just expert, but also people of deep conviction and conscience. And I agree with my colleagues that there ought to be an independent commission that can have public hearings, produce recommendations and a report. But I also believe that there has to be a special prosecutor. because what I hear from people in Connecticut and from my colleagues in their town halls and meetings is that people want the truth uncovered about how the Russians sought to interfere and undermine our democracy and our electoral system, and they also want accountability. They want not only the Russians to pay a price, they want anybody who colluded with the Russians or aided and abetted them to pay a price as well. And there are criminal statutes that prohibit that kind of collusion and impose serious criminal fines and imprisonment for people who might have done that. And we know that the FBI is now investigating the potential collusion of Trump associates and Trump campaign and administration officials with the Russians, as Director Comey has told us and made public. So there's no classified information there. The meeting that the FBI conducted on January 24th, preceded by one day, approximately, your first meeting with Donald McGahn, isn't a fact that Michael Flynn lied to the FBI?
And I can't reveal the internal FBI investigation, Senator, even though that part would not technically be classified. It's an ongoing investigation, and I can't reveal that.
Did you tell Donald McGahn that then National Security Advisor Flynn told the truth to the FBI?
No, he asked me how he had done in the interview, and I specifically declined to answer that.
Because it was part of an investigation?
That's right.
Was that intended to indicate to him that Michael Flynn had a problem in that interview?
No, I was intending to let him know that Michael Flynn had a problem on a lot of levels, but it wasn't necessarily with respect to how he performed in the interview. I was intentionally not letting him know how the interview had gone.
And lying to the FBI is a crime, correct?
It is, yes.
Violation of 18 United States Code 1001.
That's right.
And it's punishable by 5 years in prison.
Yes, it is.
So if Michael Flynn lied to the FBI, he had a ton of legal trouble facing him.
He could face criminal prosecution if he lied to the FBI, yes.
And if he became a foreign agent for another country, for Turkey, which he was a foreign agent for, without getting permission from the Department of Defense, he faced criminal penalties for that and still faces them, correct?
Yes, it's certainly FARA violations can be criminally prosecuted, yes.
In fact, it's a violation of 18 United States Code 219, and that's punishable by 2 years in prison, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And his failure to disclose payments from foreign sources, which also he had done before you went to Donald McGahn, is also criminally punishable, is it not?
That was not a topic I discussed with Mr. McGahn, and so not something I can discuss here today.
But it is, in fact, from your knowledge, a violation of criminal law, is it not?
To not disclose payments from foreign, yes, but I'm not speaking to his specific conduct, just generally that it is, yes.
If Michael Flynn is prosecuted for any of these crimes, isn't it possible that the Vice President of the United States might be a witness?
I guess it would depend on the crime.
If it were a false statement to the FBI about his conversations with the Russians, wouldn't the Vice President potentially be called as a witness to corroborate that false statement?
You know, I would be, certainly that's possible, but I'd be speculating how such criminal prosecution would come together.
So where I'm going is the need for a special prosecutor is because officials at the highest level who are responsible for appointing the Deputy Attorney General, the United States Attorney General, are all potentially witnesses, and they are even targets, correct?
Potentially.
And so a special counsel, in order to hold those government officials or others responsible, really has to be independent, correct?
Well, Department of Justice lawyers pride themselves in being able to be independent regardless of whether they're appointed as a special counsel.
But the ultimate decision whether or not to prosecute, for the sake of appearance, as well as in reality, should be made by someone who is unquestionably independent, objective, and impartial.
Senator, I absolutely understand your concerns here. But the fact of the matter is that, particularly as someone who just departed from the Department of Justice, I'm just not going to wade into whether or not they should have a special counsel or an independent counsel in this matter. I don't really think they need the formers telling them how to do their jobs.
Well, I'm going to be very unfair to you and just ask you as a private citizen, wouldn't you like to see a special counsel appointed under these circumstances?
Not going to go there either, Senator.
As an expert witness.
All right, you know what? Blumenthal doesn't want to do the work. There is no question in my mind. Blumenthal has always wanted an independent counsel. And, here's the thing. If you want an independent counsel, that's fine, except that you will hear nothing. Nothing. We will not see any testimony. We will not hear any. And wouldn't you like to see Mike Pence be a witness? I would love to see. And you won't see if Blumenthal has his way. Blumenthal just wants this off of the plate of the Senate. He doesn't want it in the Intelligence Committee. This is Judiciary, obviously. This is a subcommittee of the Judiciary Committee. And he doesn't want to deal with it. And there are some people that do want it public and want to deal with it. I am one of those people. So I know that Sidney Blumenthal does not believe that that the Senate should be doing. What am I calling him? Sidney? Oh, Richard. Dick Blumenthal. That's easy. Dick doesn't want to take the time and the because Dick's position is, yeah, it is. Dick's position is that they're not an investigatory body. Okay, as I don't know, the House is, but the Senate isn't. Either that or he knows that Senator Richard Burr, who is the chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, isn't hiring the staff that they believe they need to investigate this, isn't hiring anybody, and that, he's kind of, slow walking it, and he wants this thing to move fast. I don't know. But that's all Richard Blumenthal ever talks about is, don't we need an independent? I wanted it. And she's, she's right. She goes, what are you asking me for? I'm here. I got information. Get it out of me. Make me talk. I'm skipping him.
Did you ever find a situation where
This is Lindsey Graham.
Trump business interests in Russia gave you concern?
Not in the course of the preparation of the intelligence community assessment.
Since?
I'm sorry?
At all, anytime?
Senator Graham, I can't comment on that because that impacts
there's a lot of no commenting.
Investigation.
It wasn't enough to put into the report.
That's correct.
Okay. Ms. Yates, the rule of law, you cannot allow people to leak classified information because they want a particular outcome.
This is all they care about. I just want to show you.
Law. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
All Republicans care about
I think you both agree with that concept.
Is the leak.
Did Mr. McCann, in your view, Ms. Yates, ask reasonable questions about your concerns?
I didn't really have a judgment about whether they were reasonable or unreasonable, but I do think that Mr. McGahn was trying to get to the bottom in our discussions of what had happened with General Flynn.
And he wanted to actually see the information that you were talking about.
He indicated he did. Again, I don't have any way of knowing what happened after that.
But he said he wanted to, and you tried to set that up.
That's right.
Okay. Now, about surveillance. This is very important. An American citizen cannot be surveilled in the United States for colluding with a foreign government unless you have a warrant. Is that a true statement of the law?
That's right.
Is it fair to say that incidental collection occurs even in the United States?
That's correct as well, yes.
Okay, so there's two situations that we would have found out what General Flynn said to the Russian ambassador. If there was a FISA warrant focused on him, was there? Was there? Yes, either one of you.
Again, I think I'm not going to answer whether there was a FISA warrant, nor am I even going to talk about whether General Flynn was talking to the Russians.
Okay.
Well, I have to, obviously, I'm going to go along with...
Well, if he wasn't talking to the Russians, we've had a hearing for no good reason. So clearly he's talking to the Russians.
Right.
And we know about it. So if there is no FISA warrant, I'm going to find out about this, by the way.
When?
The other way that we know what he was talking about the Russian, if he was incidentally surveilled. So those are the two options. Do we know who unmasked the conversation between the Russian ambassador and General Flynn? Was there unmasking in this situation?
Are you looking at me?
Yes, sir.
You're looking at me.
I don't know.
Do you, Ms. Yates?
I can't speak to this specific situation, but can I try to clarify one point on this unmasking thing?
Yeah. Very quickly.
Okay, I'll try to do it quickly. As a consumer of intelligence, for example, I would receive intelligence reports from various agencies.
I get that, no.
Now, oftentimes the names are already unmasked by the intelligence agency.
The bottom line here is I want to know how it got to the Washington Post. Somebody had to have access to the information, and they gave it to the Washington Post. Is that a fair statement?
That's right. That's what it looks like to me.
Is that right, General Clapper?
Yes.
And it was, neither one of you did it.
That's right.
That's right.
How many people can request unmasking of an American citizen in our government, General Clapper? How many?
I don't have an exact number. It's, I think, fairly limited because it's normally fairly high-level officials.
How did you know that General Flynn was talking to the Russians? Who told you?
And I can't reveal that in an open setting. But what I was trying to say is that oftentimes we receive intelligence reports where the name of the American citizen is already unmasked, and it's unmasked by the intel agency because not based on anybody's request, but because the name of that citizen is essential.
Is that the situation here?
I can't, okay. Senator, I cannot.
Thank you. My 4 minutes is up. Thank you both. But I want to know the answer to these questions. Senator Whitehouse.
All right, I'm going to take a break here, and we'll come back and hear Sheldon Whitehouse. That was important. That was important. She's trying to let them know that neither her nor James Clapper requested the unmasking of Michael Flynn, who obviously was recorded speaking to the Russians in such a way that everybody's hair was on fire in the intelligence community, and that report came to her with Flynn's name revealed. No one had to request it because it was already requested by somebody in our intelligence agencies, and I'll bet you that happened when Michael Flynn appeared on Russian next to Vladimir Putin. And our intelligence agency said, that is our former director of national intelligence, a guy who's got the keys to the kingdom, sitting next to Vladimir Putin.
All things Randy at randyrhodes.com.
Go for launch.
Speaking truth to power, The Randi Rhodes Show.
Buy a stinking podcast. Well, new economic numbers are out, and the Trump administration saw the worst economic growth in the last 3 years. And the really scary part is, who knows where the economy is going from here? That's why it is the perfect time to buy gold. Call ITM Trading now and speak to a precious metals consultant and ask for a free gold kit. Just say you're a Randi Rhodes listener and you'll get a complimentary copy of their newsletter. This issue examines 3 troubling economic problems that the Trump administration must solve or risk sending the U.S. economy into a full-blown recession or even worse. The newsletter also examines how you can benefit from these current economic conditions and how to take the right steps to protect yourself. ITM Trading has a long history of publishing original material that breaks down the complex financial system, enabling you to make informed financial decisions. You will love this information. Call my friends at ITM Trading today at 1-888-OWN-GOLD and ask for a free gold kit and get the complimentary newsletter. 1-888-OWN-GOLD. 1-888-OWN-GOLD.
Have you ever bought anything because of an infomercial? I'm afraid I am a sucker for those spots, and all my opinions are mine and mine alone. Welcome to She Persisted. I'm Melissa Carter for the Progressive Voices Network. The latest thing I first made fun of, and then I sat through the entire commercial, is the kitty roo. Now, this hooded sweatshirt has a built-in compartment for your cat, much like a pouch on a kangaroo. And that way, if you are chilling on the couch or walking around your home, your cat can stay comfortably warm in his or her little pocket. Another item that almost had me picking up the phone to order is the Magic Trax Glow in the Dark racetrack. I mean, I saw the commercial many times and wondered who would enjoy it more, my 2-year-old son or me. I mean, you can turn the lights off, go crazy with wiggling the tracks in different directions, and the lit cars stay on the track. The commercial makes it look like you were having a rave right in your own living room. Give me a pacifier! It doesn't always turn out so well when you give in to the temptation, though. One thing I purchased from an infomercial and was quite disappointed with it was the Organic Green nonstick frying pan. Nothing sticks to this pan, not even an egg. And that's when the person on the TV begins sliding the said cooked egg across the surface of the miracle pan with ease. But not in my kitchen. That pan is the worst in my collection and requires quite a scraping no matter what I cook. It sits in the drawer unused unless I have no other clean cookware and am forced to break it out. Much like having to turn my underwear inside out, using that pan is something I would do, but not admit it to anyone. Now, my favorite infomercial of them all is to watch the one pimping Flex Seal. How exciting is this product? I mean, all you have to do is spray this liquid rubber anywhere and water becomes your bitch. And now there is a Flex Seal tape. No need for a spray can or brush to keep in even the most stubborn leaks. I love watching that guy in his boat floating on a screen door soaked in Flex Seal. It is a miracle product, really. Before I open up my own as seen on TV store, a friend recently gave this valuable advice. Melissa, change the channel. This has been She Persisted for the Progressive Voices Network. I'm Melissa Carter.
For a commercial-free, on-demand, whenever, wherever listening experience, visit randyrhodes.com for your personal premium podcast today.
Okay, so this is you watching me watch the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee taking testimony from James Clapper and Sally Yates while we watch together, is what it is. Do the math, everybody. Sometimes the facts have to be managed. Okay, so here is Senator Sheldon Whitehouse proceeding.
There are multiple levels of security clearances, and they're issued by different agencies, correct? So having one from DOD doesn't necessarily make you good for all positions in all places.
It does not.
And indeed, DOD operates clearances at multiple levels, correct?
Right, but I think the key point here is that, as I indicated earlier, the requirements for a TSSCI versus the requirements for occupying a sensitive position in the White House as a part of the National Security Council or as
way higher than for a retired general.
And as I can attest, much more invasive and aggressive than a standard TSSCI.
Now, in terms of compromised tradecraft, if you have somebody and you have them compromised, it's pretty standard compromised tradecraft to ask them to do some little thing for you under the threat of having the compromising information disclosed. And if you succeed, you now have two things on them. And you work it that way to get somebody more and more enmeshed in compromise until they're more or less owned by the intelligence agency. Is that a fair description of how you can develop compromise through regular tradecraft?
Yes.
Okay. Just want to make that sure because we're talking a lot about it here. Last thing, my list. So, I went through the list, looked at like propaganda, fake news, trolls, and bots. We can all agree from the IC report that those were in fact used in the 2016 election. Hacking and theft of political information, the hack into the DNC and into the Podesta emails, I think we can all agree that that's a yes. Timed leaks of damaging material, that appears very strongly to be a yes because of the timing of the release smack after the Access Hollywood release. I believe that the answers were correct no as to in-country assassination and political violence by the Russians here in the United States. Would you both agree with that?
I don't think we turned up any evidence of that.
Okay. And controlling investment in key economic sectors for leverage. It seems that our economy is probably a little too big for that, and there was no evidence of that in the IC report either, correct?
That's correct.
So the question of shady business and financial ties that not only start out as bribery, perhaps, or as highly favorable deals, secret deals with Russians, but that in turn can then turn into compromise.
It could.
It's not just the carrot of I'm continuing to bribe you. At some point, you have a stick over the individual of I'm going to out the deal that we have unless you do this, correct?
That's classic compromise.
And we do not yet know the extent to which that has played a role in the 2016 Russian election hack, correct?
I don't.
And in terms of corrupting and compromising politicians, same. We don't know the full extent of whether or not politicians have been corrupted or
I certainly don't. I did not and don't.
So if we were to go down this, yes, 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 no, no, question mark would be our tally at the end. Are we agreed on that?
Yes.
Okay. Anything else, Ms. Yates?
Not for me, sir.
Terrific. Thank you. Yield back my 9 seconds.
You're a trendsetter.
You're a trendsetter. Okay, so if you can't see what Sheldon Whitehouse has behind him, he's got a big white placard, and it's got a whole checklist of things that we have answers to and things we don't have answers to. And one of the things we have answers to is propaganda was inserted into our election by the Russians. The fake news generation disseminated by bots was infused into our elections. Our political organizations like voter registration, information, the DNC, the RNC, they were hacked. We know that there were timed leaks. For instance, the Access Hollywood tape comes out, and the very following day we start to get WikiLeaks dumps. We know that there have been assassinations of people that are connected with this story, but not here in the United States. We do know that people were poisoned. We do know that people were killed in Russia who seem to have known about the hacking or who seem to have been informed about compromising some of the people around Donald Trump, but nothing here. So that was a no. Investing in key economic sectors. Sheldon Whitehouse decided that our economy is too big for them to have had an effect on our key economic sectors. Although I would say that having Rex Tillerson as Secretary of State, former head of ExxonMobil, discussing a $500 billion oil deal with Russia might be investment in a key economic sector. He's also talked about shady shell companies that operate here in the United States. And he doesn't know the answer to whether or not our politicians were compromised yet because we don't know the answer. However, I will submit that today we got information from a golf writer. You never know where the big story's going to come from. I read a lot of things. And one of the golf writers who was doing the autobiography of Jack Nicklaus was covering Donald Trump because Donald Trump called him and begged him to come to his new golf course in North Carolina one day. And this particular golf writer really wasn't in the mood to go to Donald Trump's golf course in North Carolina that day, but he did. And when he got there, he was looking around and he asked Donald Trump, because Donald said, ask me anything you want. And he said, well, where is all this money coming from for this here golf course? And Donald Trump told him, it's mostly Russian money. We got $100 million from the Russians. And then Eric Trump told him, yeah, there's so much Russian money in this golf course. It's an amazing thing how they love to invest with us. And of course, you have Don Jr. back in 2008 saying that all the apartments were being purchased by Russians and that Russian money was just pouring in. Perhaps it is true that Michael Flynn has been under investigation by our intelligence agencies for a really stinking long time. Like from the time he was fired by the Obama administration and then showed up on Russian television at the lead table sitting next to Vlad. Perhaps that started an investigation of him and even Jill Stein, who she was sitting at that table too. And nothing was ever found that was untoward about Jill Stein or worth your while, but stuff was found about Michael Flynn, and that the intelligence agencies have been compiling this dossier on Michael Flynn for a really stinking long time, and that by the time the Trump administration incoming was ready to announce that Michael Flynn was going to be their national security advisor, the intel agencies allowed that information to arrive at the acting attorney general's office. and had a note upon it saying this man is utterly compromised. Donald Trump is utterly compromised. You really need to talk to the White House, especially about the underlying conduct, whatever that might be, of Michael Flynn. And she does. And the only question the White House had was, why do you care if we're lying to each other? And she says at the second meeting, after they requested it, the reason why we care is because he's lying to the American people, number one. And number two, there's a lot of prosecutable crimes here. Let's go over the statutes that apply to this man's situation. Now, in this little brief testimony here, we found out it's possible that he could have lied to James Comey on January 24th ahead of Sally Yates getting the report that says, call Don McGahn, we're done with him. We got what we need. So now you can notify the White House. He should not be in any classified setting. He should not receive any more classified information. And Donald Trump actually goes ahead after he's warned by Obama and after Sally Yates is at the White House telling Donald Trump's counsel, Don McGahn, that Flynn should never be around anything classified going forward. The next day, Michael Flynn is included in a phone call between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin himself. Michael Flynn is included in that phone call. So is Steve Bannon. So is Reince Priebus. So is everybody on his team in the White House. Bannon's on the phone call, Reince is on the phone call, Flynn is on the phone call, and Trump is on the phone call to Vlad. What in the hell kind of judgment does Trump have if he's been told that this man is blackmailable and compromised when he puts Michael Flynn on the phone with Vladimir Putin, even after being warned? That right there is something every American ought to question. Who is Donald Trump loyal to? Is he loyal to Vlad? Is he loyal to Flynn? Or is he loyal to us? America first and all that. So this is really disgusting. We go through this list. Was there propaganda? Yes. Was there fake news? Yes. Was there trolls and bots? Yes. Was there hacking and theft of political information? Yes, there was. Were there timed leaks of damaging material? Yes, there was. Was Roger Stone and Rudy Giuliani told ahead of time that this stuff was coming out? Yes, they were. They said as much. Was there assassination and political violence? Well, in Russia there was. Here, not so much. Was there control in key economic sectors? I say yes, if that deal between our new Secretary of State and Russia is a provable deal. And it is. So I say yes to that. They say question mark. Were there shady business and financial ties between Russia and the United States? I say yes. And was there corruption or compromise of our politicians? Clearly, in Flynn's case, yes.
All things Randy at randyrhodes.com.
Go for launch.
Speaking truth to power, The Randi Rhodes Show.
Buy a stinking podcast.
Here's a sample of what you'll hear on the Leslie Marshall Show weekdays, 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern on the Progressive Voices Network. One of the things that Republicans hated about the Affordable Care Act is that people had a mandate to have insurance, okay? So when you take away that mandate, what does that do? That says that a lot of the young, healthier segment of those roles can, if they want, leave, and they might opt to. And then if they do and choose anyone not to have insurance, what happens? They go to the emergency room. And then what happens? Especially when more people are becoming seniors, and as we age, we get sick, what happens? Then you have emergency rooms overburdened with so many patients and not enough medical teams to take care of those patients. Now, these are not just statements I say. This is not opining. This is fact. If you look at how many hospitals have closed throughout the United States, there are people in rural areas, you're listening to me, many of you, in rural areas of the United States that have to drive an hour and a half, sometimes 2 hours just to get to a medical facility. If somebody doesn't have insurance, they're not being checked at the doctor's office. They're going to get help that they know they can't be turned away from at the ER when it reaches critical mass. And by the way, folks, that's exactly the reason originally we needed reform in the first place. So what this bill will do, if it becomes law, is send us right back to where we were. Overburdened ERs, forcing more hospitals to close because they can't cover the costs. And that's just with removing the mandate, okay? Then what happens? Well, then the insurance companies are going to have to increase the rates. I mean, they're losing people. Hello. And then what else are they going to have to do? To offset that, right? What are they going to have to do? So Republicans can help corporations, these poor insurance companies where these presidents are making 7 figures and have a golden parachute even if they fail, and I digress. What do? They say, you know what? You can take the people with pre-existing conditions off, and then you can offer the healthy people a lower premium or maybe a lower deductible. And some of you go, yeah, but what happens to those people with pre-existing conditions? Oh, don't worry about it. They say we're going to have a risk pool. $8 billion is not going to fund over 20 million people with a pre-existing condition. It does nothing to cover the future. So what that does by having a risk pool, it basically says, look, we have money so you can buy insurance. What it doesn't tell you is the insurance companies can raise your rate so high that it doesn't matter how much money's in that risk pool, and you're not going to be able to afford the insurance. So quite frankly, I'm not trying to scare you, but if you have a pre-existing condition, you have every right to be scared. And it's the people out there with the pre-existing conditions, even more so, who need to be the most vocal now and through that midterm election. Because this is not political for you, it's personal. And more than personal, it's physical. It involves you personally and your physical health. And this is just a reality. This is a reality. If you have a pre-existing condition, with Obamacare, insurance companies could not refuse you insurance and could not charge you more. If you have AIDS, an insurance company with this new plan can say, I'm going to deny you coverage. And the insurance company with this new plan also could say, well, I won't deny you coverage, or you can stay with me, pick an insurance company, Joe's Insurance, but I'm going to increase your premiums by 137%. And nothing stops them from doing that. That is frightening. That's un-American. It's inhumane. Those are not family values. That is not being pro-life. Hear the whole story on The Leslie Marshall Show, Monday to Friday, 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern, 3 to 4 p.m. Pacific on the Progressive Voices Network.
The Randi Rhodes Show is brought to you by our partners at ITM Trading. Call them at 1-888-OWN-GOLD and ask for a free gold kit. 1-888-OWN-GOLD.
All things Randy at randyrhodes.com.
Go for launch.
Speaking truth to power, The Randi Rhodes Show.
How did the conversation between the Russian ambassador and Mr. Flynn make it to the Washington Post?
Well, which one of us are you asking?
Ms. Yates.
Yeah.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
All of us would like to know that, and I don't know the answer to that.
Yeah. Nor do I know the answer to that.
Is it fair to say that if somebody did make an unmasking request, we would know who they were, and we could find out from them who they shared the information with? Is that fair to say? The system would allow us to do what I just described.
Well, unmasking requests are not made to the Department of Justice.
No, but to the agency who does the collection.
That's my understanding. Is that,
so
yes,
there should be a record somewhere in our system whether or not an unmasking request was made for the conversation between Mr. Flynn and the Russian ambassador. We should be able to determine if it was made, who made it. Then we can ask, what did they do with the information? Is that a fair statement, Mr. Clapper?
Yes.
Okay.
That's all the Republicans care about, is who unmasked. Who unmasked? And it's becoming very obvious that somebody inside the intelligence gathering apparatus, maybe somebody inside the DNI, maybe somebody inside the CIA, maybe somebody inside the Defense Department, somebody who was monitoring the known Russian intelligence operatives in this country, like an Ambassador Kislyak, he would be one of those, had requested the unmasking before it even got to Sally Yates, before it even got to James Clapper, and that when she got the complete report that she notified White House counsel about, that name Michael Flynn in this case, was already just sitting on a piece of paper. Now, who the hell knows who but that's all they care about. They don't care that Michael Flynn, that the White House, incoming, was warned by the previous president, I fired this guy as director of national intelligence, and he has the keys to the kingdom with regard to the United States intelligence apparatus. He's got so much information, and there he is in Moscow giving speeches for pay, and there he is in Moscow sitting next to Vladimir Putin, and there he is on the telephone talking to Russian operatives and agents. All the while, our election is being hacked into by the Russians, with a preferred winner who happens to be Michael Flynn's boss-to-be. And I'm warning you, POTUS, incoming Trump, as the president of the United States, it is complicated. Don't put him in that position. He is compromised, and he does it anyway. And then the Department of Justice tells Trump's lawyer this. His only question is, why do you care? If we're lying to each other, why do you care? And then she's like, I care because there are prosecutable offenses here, and that's why the Department of Justice cares. Plus, we believe that he was not truthful with Comey on the 24th, 4 days earlier. So I'm telling you right now, fair warning, and they fire her. They fire her. And now all any of the Republicans wanted to know today is who's the leaker, who's the leaker, who's the leaker. Robert in Naples.
Hey, Andy, I know who the leaker is.
Ted Cruz.
No, I'll tell you what it is. Basically, if the same, this is the disappointing part here, is that she should have had already an answer waiting for them, because this question was going to come up every single time by every single senator. And the answer should have been, we don't know, but it's very possible, we think, that it's the same leaker that gave David Nunez those papers about the information. We also believe it's probably the same person that gave Rachel Maddow 2 out of the 1,000 pages of Donald Trump's whatchamacallit. Put the whole the whole speculation back on them. Because...
Well, here's the thing. It could be a never Trump person. It could also be somebody inside the White House who just is observing all this madness and knows that this is crazy, that we have a reality TV star as president of the United States and he doesn't know what he's doing. And this person could be a Republican hero.
Right. You know what it is, Randy? They got to muddy the water any way they can. So
yeah, I know, because this is pretty devastating news that she gave today. And truly, all we needed to do was watch. I didn't, understand that was going to be the case, but all we needed to do was watch the first hour, which I recorded and chopped up for you, so you didn't have to sit through the whole madness. But
appreciate it, Randy.
Yeah, but
you know what she should have said? You know what? We should find that person and put a fucking medal around him, because that's a fucking hero right there.
Yeah, honestly, if you have a Russian spy as the national security advisor to the president of the United States, and somebody says that's just plain sick, and they actually, start leaking it to the newspaper, they are a hero. But the truth is, they also broke the law. So what does one do?
So you know what? Here's what you do. You prosecute, you find him, you prosecute him, and the next administration totally let them out of jail. No problem, never been charged.
You pardon him?
Pardon him, of course.
Yeah.
Well, Randy, I love you.
I love you too. Yeah, we could actually be looking at somebody inside the White House. We could be looking at somebody inside the intelligence agencies. Obviously, this information got to DOJ with Flynn's name in full view, because she knew who she was warning the White House about, and she, under oath today, said that she didn't unmask anybody, and that sometimes the intelligence arrived unmasked. The intelligence came across her desk. She didn't make a request to know who U.S. person number 1 was, because it was already right there in the report in front of her when it got to her desk. So somebody inside the intelligence apparatus, it could have been, for all we know, it could have been Michael Flynn. Michael Flynn could actually be the leaker. He could have been exhausted by now. He could have been terrified by now. He could have cut a deal by now. He could have listen, remember, he was interviewed on January 24th by Comey or somebody at the FBI, right? So he's interviewed on the 24th. He could have said, yes, that was me on the phone. I'm done. Let's make a deal. I'll, retroactively register as a foreign agent because, yes, I was lobbying for Turkey. Yes, I took money from Russia, but cut me a deal. And then the intelligence report could have arrived on her desk with Flynn as American number one because it came from Flynn himself. Wouldn't that be something? Nick in Mississippi.
Hey, how you doing, Randy?
Hello.
Hello. Well, I have to do this again. I have to beat on a half-dead horse.
Uh-oh.
Make sure it doesn't get up.
All right.
I really believe that when this is done, it's going to take down, I said this before, it's going to take down half the Republican Party, and they're scared.
They are scared. He was tweeting like a maniac this morning and misspelling the word counsel. He's got a White House counsel and he misspells the word counsel.
Well, he doesn't know any better.
No, he doesn't, and neither do his followers. It is an interesting thing, a mental predisposition to not knowing the difference between TWO, TOO, and TO, or THEIR. THEY apostrophe RE. I mean, or THERE. It's just basic English, and for some reason, Trump supporters don't have a grasp upon it.
Speaking of Trump supporters, here's a shocker for you.
Yeah.
I tuned over to Fox News just to see if they were, broadcasting the hearings.
Oh, were they?
They are.
They are.
Yeah, or at least they were.
Oh.
That's exactly what I said. Oh. Now, how you girls going to spend that over there on Fox?
I'll tell you exactly how they do it. They take the Republican questions about the leaker and they play those up. And they ignore Richard Blumenthal. They ignore Sheldon Whitehouse. They ignore Al Franken. They ignore, Debbie Klobuchar. They just ignore all the Democrats' questions.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what they could do with it.
Yeah. But I really believe that this is going to take down the Republican Party.
Well, it sure could take down the entire Trump administration, that's for sure. I mean, there's 7 people here. There's Manafort, there's Carter Page. By the way, Carter Page he wrote a big, long letter saying, why don't you just have me testify? I want to come and testify, and this garbage about me, it's just... So they invited him, the Senate did, come testify, and he responded, I can't. I know.
I really believe that it's going to go further than the Trump administration.
Yeah?
Yeah, I think it's going to be the Trump administration just at the very minimum. Because you got to look at, what's his face? Turtle face.
McConnell.
Yeah, because he had to know something, too. Okay, and he wasn't going to say
Well, I'll
anything.
tell you, Paul Ryan knew something because when Devin Nunes pretended to get information from the intelligence community, he really got it from the White House, as we know. And he did all that so Sally Yates couldn't testify. Remember, they blocked her from testifying before in March.
That's right.
Okay, and so Nunes went to Ryan and said, I'm going to the press. I got this information, and I need to get it out in the press so that Sally Yates will not be, able to testify. And Ryan knew that he had gotten it from the White House. So Ryan's involved, too, now.
Yeah. And what I'm looking at, too, about Mitch McConnell is he wasn't going to say anything because he wanted to get paid. And his wife taking on the...
Transportation, yeah.
Yeah, that was his payment.
Yeah, I believe that's right. I think everybody had a horse in this race. They all had something they wanted, and Trump gave it to them, and so they stayed quiet. It's all blackmail. It's everything that's been going on is blackmailable stuff. The behavior of these, quid pro quo guys, I'll cover for you, but you give me this, is really not draining the swamp, I just want to say.
Yeah, now the one thing I want to say, about MSNBC, these folks during the day, stop speculating. The ones I look at is like Rachel Maddow, and I watch Lawrence O'Donnell. Okay, because they actually at least put forth an effort, to give you the actual news, minus the speculation. I like those too.
Well, the testimony was the testimony, and that's why I decided that I would give you that, because it was going to be what it is, and you couldn't do anything about what it was. You just play what it is, and then let people listen to it and figure it out.
Yeah, really appreciate appreciate it. I greatly appreciate the fact that you did that too.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for calling us today. Ed in Chicago.
Yeah, hi, Randy. Listen, I just wanted to ask you if you've given any thought as to what you're going to say when you win this year's Edward R. Murrow Award.
Oh.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Mike in Milwaukee.
Randy, real quick, the Howard kind of bust my bubble a little bit because he thinks that the unmasking might have happened before Susan Rice, but I got a gut feeling they're trying to lay this at the feet of Susan Rice.
Oh, you know it.
Questioning.
Yes, I heard
the questioning of the questioning of Senator Graham and of Grassley. I'm like, they're trying to lay this at Susan Rice's feet to try to get her here to this trial so that they can have a show trial.
I know.
So,
Grassley
folks,
is a bitter old bastard. I heard what he did. Grassley only wanted to know, where's Susan Rice? Why the hell would Susan Rice testify? She didn't do anything. She did nothing at all except her job. That's it. Oh, I don't know what happened. I think he was, juggling the telephone there. Anyway, so there you have it. That was Sally Yates' testimony. There is another hearing this week. I believe James Clapper will be over on the House side. I'm not sure. I think Sally Yates will also go on the House side to testify to the House Intelligence Committee. All of this, everything that we relied on to do our show today, you can find on cspan.org. Word for word, minute by minute. I'd encourage you to do that in case you missed any of it. And tomorrow, we're going to go over who gets hurt and when. I mean, a timeline of who gets hurt and when with this ridiculous piece of swill called Trump Care. Oh my God, the breakdown of how it happens and when it happens and to whom. Frightening.
I'm Rebecca Vallis, host of Off Kilter, powered by the Center for American Progress Action Fund. This week, on the heels of Tax Day and the Tax March, I speak with Vanessa Williamson, author of Read My Lips, Why Americans Are Proud to Pay Taxes, about how taxes became a 4-letter word. Let's take a listen.
So over the last 6 years, I've looked into Americans' tax attitudes, and I've looked at them in surveys, in interviews, I've looked at how they vote on tax issues, and I've looked at public statements about taxation, and I've just been struck by the extent to which Americans' views of taxes are just so different from the conventional wisdom. So it doesn't mean that people are necessarily happy about where they think their money's going or everything that's happening in Washington, but people see being a taxpayer as a civic responsibility, as evidence of being the kind of person who contributes to their community. And when you think about it, it's obvious. How often have you heard someone say, "Oh, I pay my taxes. I'm a taxpayer." So, and that commitment is a way of saying that you are the sort of person who gives back to the people in their neighborhood, the people in their community, and the sort of person who deserves to be listened to by their government.
And you actually point out in a New York Times op-ed that you wrote last year that just 3% of Americans disagree with the sentiment that paying their fair share of taxes is a civic duty. And you point out for reference that that's half the share of Americans who believe that the Apollo moon landing was faked. But part of what I actually would love to get into is you point out in your work that that the Boston Tea Party is often misremembered as an early instance of anti-tax fervor. You point out that that's actually not at all what the Boston Tea Party was about. Give us a little bit of a history lesson.
Yeah, so this is a funny thing. I think that, we tend to view history through the lens of the present, and so there's so much anti-tax fervor, particularly on the right in America, at the elite level, that we forget that history is often very different from our sort of modern concerns. So the Boston Tea Party is probably best understood as opposition to a tax cut, and in particular opposition to a corporate tax cut. Colonists in the United States were very upset that the British government wanted to provide sort of a special tax privilege to a particular company, a company sort of deemed too big to fail. And this was the British East India Tea Company. And so the colonists who did not want to have their market flooded with this particular kind of tea that was going to come in at sort of below local rates of payment, they didn't want their market flooded, they didn't want a monopoly. And so they went into Boston Harbor and threw the tea into the harbor. And so what is really, to me, if it has an echo in the modern context, I mean, to be a little ahistorical, it's much more like Occupy than the Tea Party, right? And for years, it was not even called the Boston Tea Party. It was called the destruction of the tea. So this sort of anti-corporate property destruction, it becoming a touchstone for the right, is actually extremely ironic.
And you actually got the idea to write this book and to do this research during the rise of the Tea Party movement in 2009. How did they take that sort of misremembrance of history and channel it into their movement?
So that's exactly right. My last book looked at the origins of the Tea Party and the effect of the Tea Party on the Republican Party as a whole, really particularly looking at how the grassroots and the elites and the conservative media work to push the party rightward. But I was at a Tea Party rally and I was just struck by how often these people who were very, very angry and frightened about what they thought their government was doing, still regularly described themselves as taxpayers and really stood on being a taxpayer as kind of a public standing, right? That I'm the sort of person who the government should be paying attention to, and my interests are not being met.
So a lot of what you've looked into in your research is not just about what it feels like to be a taxpayer or the connection between being a taxpayer and doing one's civic duty, but also fairness. There's a big current that runs throughout your work of tax fairness, and that's a lot of what actually gets people mad about taxes. It's not, you find, how much they're asked to contribute. It's much more widespread that people get angry about the feeling that the wealthy aren't paying their fair share. Tell us a